Hey, we are back. All right. So I had to upload the video to YouTube, and I guess that's how we'll do it for the foreseeable future, any part of the class, at least until I decide whether or not I want to switch over to Blackboard Ultra, because the regular version was not letting me upload directly to it. So no big deal. When you click on the videos, it's going to lead you to YouTube. And, yeah, I mean, I was going to say if you have a hard time accessing it, if it's like locked or something, let me know. But you wouldn't be seeing this message then if you couldn't access it. So never mind, I guess. But so to start, I just want to get into this evening's, tonight's, tomorrow, whenever you're watching this. Um, the first real lecture of the semester. We're going to break down some of our core concepts, and then I'm going to return to the Blackboard page for week one and just go over the assignments I'm asking you to do for this first week. I decided to keep it relatively light. There's another assignment I was considering putting in there, but we'll just wait till next week. We got time. We got 12 weeks. Might as well. All right, so I am sharing my screen. Great. Um, I've got a PowerPoint. Let's go to the PowerPoint. Let's do that. It's the smart thing to do. Okay. Just enable it. Okay, so if you recall from the syllabus, we're mentioning things like situation, and I said that in passing, specifically rhetorical situation, right? We were talking about, well, situation is a word we're familiar with, but like, how does that apply to our class? How does that apply to English and rhetoric? Well, specifically, we're focusing on um, all of interpersonal communication, all of the texts that we're going to be reading, watching, interacting with. We consider them rhetorical situations. Okay, so that's going to be this thing that we repeat over and over again. Um, what we analyze for our rhetorical analysis papers are rhetorical situations. But once again, that's you're wondering, well, how do I find a rhetorical situation? What exact? Don't fret. Like I really can't emphasize enough that almost any communication, almost any text that has been written and published, we can consider a rhetorical situation because all it needs an audience, it needs, of course, an author, somebody that wrote it, created, put it together, filmed it, wrote the code for it, designed it, whatever it was, whatever the medium is that they're working with, it needs some human, right? Not AI, but some uh, person or people that were crafting that story or that message, whatever it was. And they did so with a purpose, right? They did so kind of with a specific audience in mind. Of course, that they then adjusted the language that they use, the presentation of the message, perhaps even the medium that they use, right? Um, According to who the audience was that they wanted to target with that piece. So, uh, if you're confused right now, right, what I'm going to do in this lecture is just like go through different examples of everyday media that we can consider rhetorical situations. It's just a matter of breaking it down properly, right? And so that's the purpose of us introducing these terms into our semester, so that we have the right words um, to properly assess these things that seem every day, right? Things that no doubt you come across on an almost constant basis, right? Certainly whenever you're on your phones, you're interacting with media. Yes, You're not just, like you're unless you're maybe using the Notes app and writing a message to yourself, almost every other situation that you're on your phone, you're interacting with something that the creator has made, and you're the audience, or you yourself are creating something intended for a certain audience. So we're going to take a look at these things that again might feel so, every day that it's like, well, why is this even worth our time? Why would we even, you know, begin to break this down rhetorically? But again, it's my purpose in doing with these sort of non-traditional texts, um, but nevertheless hyper popular, right? Hyper usable, relatable, ones that resonate with us, so that we can understand that writing is this like bigger than the English classroom kind of thing. Hence the title, What is Writing? Writing isn't just a book, it isn't just, a research paper. Um, and of course, our assignments, you're going to craft more than just a paper in this class. When you write papers, you're going to be asked to look at things beyond just books for the sake of analyzing them. And so, I really want us to get out of our heads in case we're, in that position. Each class is different, each person is different. But I want us to get out of this sort of box, expecting this class, expecting English, expecting writing to all fall into this one sort of category, um, which has typically been informed by our previous experiences in other English classes, or um, using academic writing, right? That's kind of typically that's what informs someone's distaste with writing, because you've had teachers and assignments that you didn't like to do, that you struggled with, that you thought were boring, and now you just think writing in general sucks, and it's this one thing. But it is so much more than that. So, even something like this, I won't go through the comic strip, but a comic strip is writing, right? We're seeing writing right in front of us. But even when we can't see it, even when it hasn't like materialized as text in front of our eyes, there's potentially still writing that's involved in the process behind the scenes in the creation of the project, right? Before it's published, before it's disseminated to the world, writing is involved with it. Okay. So, starting first with rhetorical situation. I mentioned this about rhetoric. It's kind of hard to put it into a nice, neat definition. Same thing with the rhetorical situation. When I take or when I took my grad classes, um, even up to that point, right? So this is, of course, well beyond uh, where we're at right now. But even up until this point where you're getting a graduate degree and you're kind of, you've got years of college level academic experience and you're under your belt already, they ask you to define what rhetoric is, and everyone struggles with it, right? And everyone has a different sort of definition. And that's because, yeah, there's you can look up Merriam-Webster, you can look up dictionary.com, but professionals, true scholars, you know, tend to not like just define it with such simplistic terms. But regardless, I think that it's good so that we can get our footing and just like begin to understand, because that, of course, will lead us to, I guess, like the criteria, right, that we need to consider to evaluate a certain rhetorical situation. So, rhetorical situation, we think about it as, I myself, the conditions of and people involved in a communication. So, consider this moment right now when you are watching this video. You're essentially in class, right? You're taking an online class, it's an asynchronous class. You're watching these video lectures. Maybe you're doing it, uh, very last minute, or maybe you're doing it on the first day that the class opens, Monday the 22nd. But that's what we mean by certain conditions that are impacting the situation, the given moment in which you are uh, experiencing this course. Now, that would be totally different if tomorrow, Monday morning, we meet at 8 a.m. and we interface. in person and we introduce ourselves and I give this lecture live in person, that again changes the conditions, right? So the format of a specific situation, that's one of those sort of criteria that of course affects all of the expectations, the way you interpret the message, the way that you of course can respond to the message, right? The pitfall of the digital class is that I'm making this on Sunday night and it's going to be scattered times during the week when all of our class ends up watching this video, but none of you all will have an opportunity to give me immediate, in the moment feedback on anything that we're talking about, right? It's not a live discussion. The discourse that takes place, it's almost all going to be digital, right? And as I've mentioned, I encourage you to contact me and everything, but that's totally different than if we were live and in person. And maybe some of you are raising your hands, or maybe some of you are confused. Some have comments that they want to make. So the format, it changes everything about the way that this class is happening right now. But regardless, it's a rhetorical situation, right? Even if it feels like, well, the people are staying the same, right? It's the role of the teacher and student, and but even within that, right? Even within that, depends on the kind of students that you are, right? Maybe are you a student that prefers visual learning? Maybe you're somebody that likes the online format better because you can go back and like replay these lectures and listen to them again, which is much more difficult to do if we were doing it in person unless you're you've gotten permission from the instructor to record it. You're kind of at the um, you're limited by your own notes that you're taking, right? And so this is what I mean, that you are constantly experiencing rhetorical situations, dozens, if not hundreds, perhaps even thousands of them, right? I mean, if some of you like work retail, for example, if you work at a Starbucks, how many customers do you get, in an 8-hour shift? Each one of them, it's a different rhetorical situation, right? Even though we can categorize it as like, oh, it's customer and worker, customer and employee interactions, but each one of them is different. There are different nuances to all of them because it's different people, and then they have different expectations and different demeanors. Maybe one of them they're wearing a shirt of a band that you like, and you say something to them, and it sparks uh, this conversation, right? It goes off on a tangent that wasn't necessarily like expected or what your interactions were with the majority of the rest of the customers. Okay, so these rhetorical situations are happening all the time in your life. Um, and so it's worth us addressing that, right? It's worth us understanding that this isn't something that's so distant, so foreign to us. It's something we're familiar with. We just might not have considered it, you know, in these sort of like terms before. So let's get to that then. Like, so if we can identify a rhetorical situation, how do we start breaking it down in order to conduct like a brief but proper rhetorical analysis? Well, this is where we start. Okay, we think genre, audience, and purpose. Okay, those are the first three criteria that we need to float um, into the analysis so that we can get more think about it more in depth. And so to start over here, right? Like genre, again, a word we're familiar with. I think typically when we think of genre, we think about it in terms of like movie genres, right? So like, is it a comedy? Is it a scary movie? Is it, an action movie? And that's correct, of course, right? You're not wrong for thinking like that. But when we talk about it this semester, understand that genre is just the mode of communication. Okay. So the medium, right? Another synonym. How is the message being communicated? How is it being presented to you? Is it a text message? Is it an email? Is it an Instagram post? Okay. Is it a letter, a traditional send it through the mail letter? All of those have their own sort of conventions that you have to adhere to. And once again, it changes this rhetorical situation. It changes the way that we operate in that moment. So genre, that makes the most sense. That's the first place where we start. Think about the situation. How do we categorize this? Like what is this? Right? What's going on right now? Well, I'm watching a video lecture for my English class, my online English class. It's a Monday. It's the first day of the semester for me. It's the first class, right? So, we always want to be as specific as possible. Okay. It's easy to get into um, the bad habits of just like, well, let me just give like the answer that's correct. Certainly it's correct. You're not wrong if you were to say that, well, this mode of communication is a tweet. That's great. But it's more than that because there isn't just like one way to write a tweet. There isn't just one way to make a TikTok video, right? So that's where the specificity comes into mind. And it goes for all of these. So we start with genre, that's the mode of communication. Next, audience, who's the author writing to? Okay, who is it that I'm expressing my message to? You know, if you've been out all weekend and then you go see, your parents Sunday night, Monday morning, and they ask you, hey, what'd you get into this weekend? What were you doing? You're not going to give them all the details necessarily if you were out partying, right? So, oh, I was studying. I was studying. I was with my friends and we were doing a study group. Whereas if you see some friends who you weren't with that weekend, but they ask you, hey, what'd you get into this weekend? So, oh yeah, I got super drunk, right? We were drinking beer all weekend. We went to the Bears game. You're going to give details different depending on the audience you're expressing the message to. And the words you use, the word choice you use, right? You're not necessarily going to like curse in front of your parents, but maybe you will to heighten you know, heighten the stakes of the situation when you're telling the story to your buddies. So details, word choice, the language you're using, maybe even the genre of communication that you're using, right? There are certain things like my parents aren't on social media, right? They're on the internet, right? They like read comments on stuff, but like they're not on like TikTok. They're not on Instagram. Um, so I couldn't communicate with them through those channels. Whereas other friends of mine, of course, right? Like there's you got your group chats. You got that's how you send memes to people. If I wanted to do something similar to my parents, to my family, I'd have to choose a different mode of communication to do so. And then we have purpose. So purpose is this idea that you're always hoping to get something out of this interaction, this moment of interpersonal communication, this situation where you are with other people, direct or indirect, right? You don't have to be like face to face with them. You don't even have to be like communicating live to them, right? Like if you're in a Zoom meeting, you can be like composing a message that again you're going to send at a later time or that you'll send now and then maybe folks will see it at this point or even more indirect, right? Something where it's like when you're posting on social media, you're not necessarily posting on social media specifically for a person. Otherwise you would just send it directly to that person that you want to communicate with. Of course you're probably like, oh, I really hope that this person sees it, right? I really hope they like my post or whatever it is. But that's different, right? Because you're sending in this like sort of mass communication mode of communication, right? So yes, you there's always something that you're even if it feels like the most banal moment where you're at work, you're stuck with coworkers that you don't like, right? You're with the boring coworker, and you're just trying to get through your shift, and maybe you're making small talk, but you're half asleep. You're just going through the motions over there. All of those things that we just said are still purposes, right? Passing the time, trying to make small talk to make the shift go by quicker, trying to come across as like friendly, but not too friendly because you don't really mess with this coworker. We've all been there. We've all been there before. Um, so purpose, like these other things, we want to be specific. Now, the textbook, as you'll read, right, our open educational resource textbook, I've pulled a couple pages. I pulled, a little section for us to read this week. It takes purpose and it kind of categorizes it into like five general different categories, right? Different directions. So it's to persuade, to inform, to entertain, to describe, to explain. Now, I think that's okay as a starting point, but like I just mentioned, we want to be more detailed than that, right? We want to be more detailed than that. When you have a meme, right? The purpose of a meme, well, yeah, it's to entertain me. That's what a meme exists. But then, well, it's also to like build community. It's like, well, I'm going to share this joke, this inside joke with other people that are going to understand it. And maybe I'm going to share with like this specific person because I really want them to like um to appreciate the joke, right? There's always that thing where you send the meme out, the video, and they don't like it, right? You don't get the ha ha in the chat, or you don't get the heart emoji, and then you feel like an idiot. You're like, oh, okay. Or they're not watching, the reels that you're sending them, right? And that's not why you sent that, right? That's not that the communication isn't going how you expected it to. It's not going the way you wanted it to. So yes, it's fine to begin auditing the purpose criteria for a rhetorical situation using any one of these five categories, but I want you to get in the habit of giving me more details than that, right? Because I'll press you. If we were in person, I would say, okay, telling me this purpose of this video is to inform. What are we informing people of? Okay. What exactly are we informing people of? So think about content, think about subject matter. Let's go through some examples. Okay. So we're going to play this little game called Is It Writing? The answer, yes. It's all examples of writing. But what we're going to do is we're going to break down each of these texts, okay, using genre, audience, and purpose. These are all different rhetorical situations. And it's to show you again that these kind of examples of writing, these rhetorical situations that we come across so often and don't think twice about, um, can be used, for our assignments this semester. Okay, so when we get to an assignment like that, absolutely, you can do a full analysis of somebody's Twitter account that you like, some social media influencer that you like, right, or some YouTuber that you like, because they're texts, right? They're crafting this stuff and they're putting it out into the world. They have followers. If they're popular, right? If you follow these people, they must be, they must have some sort of influence. They must have some sort of following. And so they're just as valid as an author as Ernest Hemingway or some of these, at least for the sake of our class. I'm not saying like Mr. Beast is like on par with like Shakespeare. Um, but what I am saying is it might be more interesting to break down a Mr. Beast video and the impact it's having on our society. That's probably more relevant than, some sonnet that Shakespeare wrote 500 years ago. So let's get into it. So the first thing I would ask if we were in person is what is this genre of communication? Like what exactly are we looking at here? And of course, we can tell it's a tweet. So I press, well, how do we know it's a tweet? So I always want us to uh, get to the answers about the sort of visual markers that are cluing us into the fact that this is a tweet. So people will always start and say, well, it looks like a tweet, right? Look at the format of it. Okay, specifically, right? Give me what specifically in this image is communicating to you that this is a tweet. That's its genre. So it's things like the little icons. right? So the comment section, the repost, the like, share, the profile picture, right? The little line going down over here implying there's a thread, right? Comments or more posts from the author, the handle, right? So at Woj ESPN, so the at sign, um, the way the date is formatted right there, the little three ellipses, the fact that it's horizontally oriented rather than like the shape of a phone, a check mark, which nowadays doesn't carry the same sort of meaning as it used to. This is admittedly an older tweet, as you can tell if you've read it already. But yes, those things tell us these are the visual markers that are conventions of this genre, and they indicate to us yes, that's this genre of text. But more specifically, like what kind of a tweet is this? So we know it's a tweet. We want to start breaking it down further. And so if we read it, breaking, Los Angeles Lakers star LeBron James has agreed on a 2-year, $97.1 million contract extension, including a player option for the 2024-2025 season. Clutch Sports CEO Rich Paul tells ESPN. James had been entering the final year of a deal worth $44.5 million. All right. So uh, even if you're not a sports fan, even if you're not an NBA fan, which of course is the first kind of place where we go to categorize this tweet. It's sports news, it's NBA news, and even if you're not a fan of it, you know who LeBron James is, right? So you're able to answer that. You're able to address that. You know that LeBron James is the most famous American athlete that is still playing, maybe the most famous American athlete living. Um, Arguably the most famous American athlete of the last 2 decades. Like this is certainly um, a person who exists in our culture beyond just his role, his position, which is NBA player, right? That's why we know him. That's at least how he got famous. But hell, he's doing movies, right? He's in Space Jam, and he was in some Bill Hader movie back in the day, right? So he has little acting roles that he does here and there. He's in commercials, right? So maybe you've seen him in those contexts. You've seen him on TV. Um, he isn't limited to just this realm because he has, because he is so popular. Um, we don't have to only consider the most obvious answer to the question of a subgenre. But then when we start figuring out who the author is, that's when it's kind of like, okay, well, then it makes sense to go in the sports direction because I'm anticipating fewer and fewer of us know who this guy is. So Adrian Wojnarowski was like the premier reporter on all things NBA for ESPN, which again, you don't have to know who he is to know that ESPN, they are the biggest sports media conglomerate in the entire world. So he is the premier NBA reporter for the premier sports media hub, and he's the author of this tweet, right? That's who we consider to be the creator of this text. He's the author. And so in understanding him, that helps us to cement this. Yes, it's sports news, even certain conventions like within the tweet itself, breaking, right? The all caps breaking. So overused, so often, that's used in tweets to like get your attention. Like, right, oh, breaking, what's going on, right? I know it's used all the time in sports media, like in the summertime in July, when the trade deadline was about to happen. Every 5 seconds, I'm checking Twitter, I'm checking my phone to see like if there are any trades happening. What are the moves that the Cubs are making? And so many people would just use the breaking, right? This little kind of header to start the tweet to get people's attention. Um, and there's people trolling and then posting false information, posting stuff before they were like getting it confirmed. And so understanding that also helps us to kind of like understand the purpose of this tweet a little bit further, right? So it's breaking news about LeBron James. It's a contract that he just got. He's getting more money to stay in Los Angeles. So a breaking news sports tweet. That seems fair as a way we could describe the genre. Um, Getting to audience. Who cares about this? Who is it that has some skin in the game? Well, obviously NBA fans, right? Sports fans in general, but specifically NBA fans, specifically LeBron James fans, specifically Lakers fans, maybe Warriors fans, because you've got LeBron James staying in your division for another year or two. Bulls fans because you're disappointed that another season without getting big free agent to maybe fix the awful franchise. Um, so those again, understanding that this is a tweet that's sports news, breaking news, NBA news, makes sense that the most obvious audience would be sports fans. But then even beyond that, like I think that like I just mentioned about the trade deadline stuff. Yes, we lay people, right? We commoners who are not in the mix, we're not in the know, like other front office people, other players, other reporters in the media. Um, we don't have the kind of insider information that they do. But so often, social media platforms like Twitter, they're like, they're breaking the news for a majority of us, and I don't mean only people outside of that community, right? It wouldn't surprise me at all if other front offices, other general managers, other presidents, other owners, coaches, players, who this was also news to them, right? They're also depending on these social media platforms to understand what's going on in the moment. Um, so they have a vested interest too, right? Yeah, it's for the fans probably, but it also is, you know, it's having this impact. It's reaching these people who are in the league, who are getting this information in real time, just like we are. And that brings us to purpose, because something interesting is happening in the halfway through the tweet. We're noticing that this is breaking news. It's coming from this individual who represents this large sports organization, but he's citing his source, and he's citing it from what seems to be perhaps a competitor or a different, Clutch Sports CEO, Rich Paul. Perhaps this is like a sports agency, right? Now, I'm sure all of us know who or what ESPN is, but very few of us probably know what Clutch Sports is, even less know who Rich Paul is. And so if you came across a tweet from Clutch Sports or Rich Paul providing this information, you might not believe it. You might not think that it's true. You might not think that it's credible. However, because it's coming from the account, the desk of Adrian Wojnarowski, who, as I just mentioned, is like the most decorated NBA reporter, the most respected NBA reporter in the game, or at least was, um, then we know it's trusted, right? We can believe this information. So his purpose in tweeting something out like this, even though it's secondary information, right? He's not the primary source for this stuff. He's not in the room with LeBron. LeBron isn't telling this to him directly. And he's also not the first person to probably tweet about this either. But because it's coming from him, first of all, his reach is a lot more. Okay. So this probably is like picking up more steam. It's becoming more mainstream. More people are seeing this than if Rich Paul or a lesser reporter is tweeting this out. And what it's doing for him, it also like kind of cements him. It continues to like solidify his position, his role as the guy, right? The one that we can depend upon, that we can rely upon for NBA information. If he didn't say anything about this, then we kind of feel like, oh, that's kind of bizarre. Is he like, you know, is he not in the know, right? Does he not know that this is going on? Like, what's the reason that he wouldn't be tweeting something out like this? That's his content. If we consider him as a content creator, that's the kind of content that he's, bound to. That's exactly what we anticipate from him. So that could be a way we think about his purpose. Oftentimes with this stuff too, it helps to even consider to think outside the box, to think outside of like what's the most obvious, when considering something like audience, for example. Yeah, sports fans, other people in the front office, other people in the league. Yeah, those are the most um, obvious sort of answers to the question of audience. But then don't we think that like other people in Los Angeles, whether they really care about the NBA or care about LA Lakers or even care about LeBron James, don't you think that they potentially are still going to be impacted by this? I think about like people in the hospitality industry, people that own restaurants near the Staples Center. Well, we have LeBron James, who's, the most famous athlete, most famous basketball player, and he's staying in your town. He's staying in your city for another couple seasons and reaching the end of his career. So, hey, maybe it's going to bring more people to LA. Last opportunity to go see LeBron James play in person. More people coming to LA means more, traffic into your hotel, means more people, more customers into your restaurant. Okay, so there's kind of like a business end of this as well. He's making a lot of money. Maybe he's in the market for a new house. If you're selling real estate in Los Angeles, maybe he wants a new car if you're a car dealer. So sometimes it helps us if we just also consider these other networks of people that aren't just like, the one we would go to right away. Got another tweet. So here's one from Kim Kardashian, and she is saying, "Hey, Jack in the Box, I have a serious complaint, but I won't fully put you on blast. Check your corporate email inbox or send me a DM with direct person for my team to contact pronto." All right, Kim Kardashian. So take a moment. Let me ask you this. Who is Kim Kardashian to us as a society? What is her role in our society? How would we sort of qualify what her job title is? And I think, the answer is she's a celebrity, right? She's an influencer. In a lot of ways, she's like the reason why, or one of the contributing, one of the originating uh, sort of influencers, right? That have led to this influencer culture that we seem to live in now. Because the influencer culture, it's not that like we didn't have an infatuation with celebrity before, right? That's been going on for decades. But influencer culture specifically has to do with the intersection of social media. And so Kim Kardashian, when she's getting popular in that time period, it's like, well, we're getting like Facebook is coming out, right? YouTube um, is becoming a thing. And in, just a few years later, we're getting Instagram, we're getting Twitter. So she really was like this celebrity figure who got famous for this or that, but like she embraced that sort of like influencer identity. And whenever I bring up this tweet in class and bring up Kim Kardashian, um, it tends to kind of divide. It tends to kind of split the class a little bit because there will be some people that, off top, they're just like, oh, well, she's vapid. She doesn't contribute anything. Uh, I think she's obnoxious. And for that reason, she sucks. And it kind of changes the way that I then respond to this message, right? Her as an author is not necessarily someone I trust because I have this sort of negative opinion about her. And then the other side, other people, they commend her, right? Maybe they like kind of some of the products that she owns or that she endorses. Maybe they appreciate her as a business person. And I always mention this. It's like, hey, like it or not, you can't debate the fact that she has influence over our culture, right? And the idea of culture, it's like, well, yeah, she's influenced over pop culture, but we're at this point with because social media just blends everything. It's like, how could you even debate that there's that pop culture doesn't also just influence like our society in general, right? Perhaps even like getting into like politics and like social policy and things like that, right? Pop culture has that sort of power, and she certainly is one of the biggest figures in pop culture. So whether you like her stuff or not, or you like her brand, you like her image, you can't argue the fact that she has concrete 100 million plus followers on all of her social media accounts. She gets these brand endorsements. She has this sort of a semblance of power, of control, right? I'm not saying she's the president, but she certainly has influence. Okay, so and again, that changes then what you how you read this tweet. And I always like to highlight the sort of irony of it, right? That she's saying, Jack in the Box, I'm not gonna fully put you on blast, and yet she's making it a public tweet. So she's still putting them on blast, and that potentially could have a more harmful effect than if she just like came outright and said, "Here's the issue." Because with my former group, those people that don't trust Kim Kardashian as an author, they're going to read this and think, oh, she's exaggerating, right? This isn't a big deal at all. No, they got her order wrong at Jack in the Box, and so now she's pissed off. Or you can read it as the other side, whereas people are saying like, oh my gosh, like this must be serious, you know? If a person of Kim Kardashian's status isn't able to get in contact with some sort of corporate representative, the big brand like Jack in the Box, and she has to resort to going onto her own social media account, right, to dispel this information, right, and spark something, then maybe we should be outraged, right? Maybe we should boycott Jack in the Box. Maybe she found a rat in her food. I'm never going to eat a Jack in the Box again if Kim K is not eating a Jack in the Box. And then there's kind of like another way to read this, and I think that you know, yes, tweet. It's a celebrity tweet. It's an influencer tweet. It's also a fast food tweet. Jack in the Box, right? Which, by the way, we're just there's one opening up right down the street from COD. So go to Jack in the Box. Um, Fast food is interesting because, especially with the way they kind of present their social media presence. Um, because it seems like they're really embracing this kind of like millennial Gen Z way of marketing of advertisements. Um, because essentially anything from like the official Wendy's Twitter account or the official McDonald's Instagram account, it's an advertisement, right? There are people like working for that company, like they're not just doing it for fun, but they're presenting in this way that it makes it feel like it's intended to be more organic. I know that there's that side where it's like, there's like some sort of um, like parabola of things that are trendy, right? Things that are cool. And then it's like the moment that like the corporate brands get involved, not only does it plateau, but phew, it plummets, it becomes stupid. Um, and so yeah, there are very like bad, egregious. I think that commercials especially are like really cringy. Like for the most part, advertisements today suck. Um, Commercials especially are like the low hanging fruit, even though they're like the most expensive to produce, and where all the creatives in an advertising agency want to get involved with. But the social media accounts, they present it in a way that feels perhaps a little more organic when they try to do kind of like the brain rot stuff, when they try to like, sound like the youth when they try to sound like a regular person. And it's probably because they have young people that are involved in the creation of these tweets. But I think back to like 2020 when like the Popeyes chicken sandwich was coming out, and that was like a big deal, right? Because we were all stuck inside and we had nothing to get excited for. But at the time, it sparked almost like a social media chicken sandwich war that then also influenced like these companies to actually make different chicken sandwiches, right? I mean, before the Popeyes chicken sandwich, McDonald's just had um, they had the McChicken and they had the chicken club back in the day, which sucked. And one time on a road trip, it like got me sick. But then they came out with their own chicken sandwich, right? Their own like premium chicken, whatever they called it, that was different from the McChicken, not just like a chicken patty. And all these other companies followed suit, right? All these other like fast food companies were doing the same thing to, you know, get involved with the chicken sandwich war, and it was going on social media, right? Where it was like you're having the Wendy's account like post something, and it's like they're trying to like roast some other, they're trying to roast Popeyes, they're trying to like you know they're just chirping these other accounts, they're trying to start like a little back and forth with these accounts, and they're using kind of like language terminology that you're only going to know if you're like chronically online and probably of like a certain age demographic. And so that's what we expect kind of, if you're in the know, then you expect that from fast food and fast food advertisements. And so we have a fast food company that is in that realm, in that space of social media advertisement. And so you might wonder, okay, is this a hoax? Is this just like a promo thing? Is this Kim Kardashian like partnering with Jack in the Box potentially? And this is how they set it off, right? This is how they kind of like spark attention because essentially that's what she wants. If we're talking about her purpose, I don't know, it doesn't necessarily spark outrage, but she wants this to like get enough, she wants to have that snowball effect where it gets big enough that it reaches these audiences, whether it's her direct followers or, I mean, you know how the algorithm works. You don't even necessarily have to be following Kim Kardashian. If the tweet is popular enough, it can still come across your timeline. So that's her purpose, right? She certainly wants that, but maybe there's something going on behind the scenes where it's some sort of collaborative effort with Jack in the Box. Unfortunately, I don't have the answer for us. I always forget to look it up every semester. I always forget to look this up. I don't know what ended up happening with this, but um, yeah, yeah. This is like stuff. These are texts. These are rhetorical situations. These are things that you can write about in your work. Okay, and so please embrace that opportunity, right? Please embrace that opportunity. Okay, so let's get then to an advertisement, and one that, depending on the way you interpret it, you might deem controversial, unacceptable, tasteless, or depending on the way you interpret it, you could think it's funny, right? You could think that it's great marketing. You could think that it's really knowing its target audience. So we have a print advertisement from IKEA. Let's read the copy of an advertisement, right? That's just the written text in the print advertisement. And it says, fighting is inevitable. At least you'll be sobbing into a new memory foam pillow. We have the Swedish translation for pillow, 14.99, IKEA. Okay. So this is another one where I always ask the class, and um, it tends to divide us, right? Some people, and it's oftentimes like a class by class basis, right? I think there's kind of like a domino effect where it's like the first person to like raise their hand and answer. Sometimes it like silences the rest of the class, and so I can't get like a full like barometer, full feel for like what everybody thinks about this, how everyone interprets it, because not everyone is gonna raise their hand and tell me what they think. But um, it seems like more on a class by class basis where somebody raised their hand and another person will kind of like echo that, but it's always different. It's always different, and so if we're looking at this as kind of like um, potentially harmful, it all depends on our interpretation of this word, right? Fighting. Fighting is inevitable. And so if we're interpreting fighting as some sort of domestic dispute, right? Some sort of abuse that's happening, physical or otherwise, then this feels very dark, right? This feels like it took a turn into a place where no company, let alone kind of like a family furniture company like IKEA, should go. And that helps us to understand it as well, right? Because it's like IKEA, they sell furniture. The majority of furniture stores, their advertisements are like very pedestrian, right? Like it's like here's the product and here's how it looks in your home. Um, Very often they kind of like lack creativity. I'm trying to remember who are those bozos that now it's like their daughters have taken over the business. So Walter E. Smith. Can't stand seeing those guys. And now their daughters have taken over. It's like they sell furniture, right? You dream it, we build it. And they're Chicago staples, certainly. But the advertisements are just so they're just boring. And that's pretty much par for the course. But IKEA as a brand, I think it tends to have a little more fun, right? Fun for everybody. When my parents, IKEA has been around, since before I was born. And so when I was a kid, my parents would take us there. Um, they had like a ball pit, and then we get like cinnamon rolls, and they had, juice and all this cool like Swedish meatballs, all this cool stuff. Where it's this huge warehouse of furniture, and your parents taking you, my parents would take me to other places, going to Pier One and stuff like that. I'm like, oh God, here we go. But IKEA was kind of fun. And then they have like sections where it's like they got stuffed animals and stuff for the kids. And it's a different sort of like experience, but very much feels like it's still within this family oriented segment that furniture companies tend to embrace, right? That's kind of like they understand their audience is typically families, parents looking to buy furniture, right? Looking to buy new furniture, but um, it still feels family oriented. And so, but nevertheless, like they tend to have a lot more fun, right? Like they're kind of, and even the pieces themselves, right? Even the furniture that you can buy, it feels kind of like minimalist and DIY, at least in the sense that you can like put it together yourself, typically. Um, and so that's what we get from IKEA. But then when we get this sort of potentially um, like scandalous, you know, copy on this advertisement, then it feels out of place. It feels like, well, what happened to this family brand, right? Well, this doesn't seem like a company where I'd want to take my child to that, right? If that's how they're going to be getting their product off, playing off of this, potentially, people that are vulnerable, right? This vulnerable community, victims of domestic abuse. That doesn't sit well with me. That's not a brand that I want to associate with. Or then there's the other side, right? We're fighting, okay. Fighting it could be fighting in the sense where it's like, yeah, relationships, um, father, son, mother, daughter, familial relationships, husband, wife, could be brother, sister, right? Siblings, could be friends, could be roommates. But I've had people before where they're like, my family and I, we fight, we're loud, we upset each other, but at the end of the day, we understand that that's just how we are. It's all love. We don't ever go too far, right? That's just our personality. We just got big personalities, you know? And so when you think about it that way, it feels a little bit less icky. And then like considering the product itself that we're selling over here, we're selling a pillow, and so do a quick idea web in your mind. Pillow, what do we associate with pillows? Well, it goes in your bed, It's for sleeping. Great. How else can we use pillow? Think about childhood. Well, pillow, pillow fighting, right? Oh, there's that word again, fighting. Pillow fighting. Is that what this is? Is this supposed to be kind of like, play on childhood, just on the innocence of kids? Like I just mentioned, that IKEA really is this like kid-friendly brand. And so, is this the situation? Is this a scenario that they're trying to play off of? Just kids fighting, and then one of them loses, or one of them gets hit too hard, and they go and cry and sob. But at least they have this new memory foam pillow. I don't have the answer. Your interpretation is what informs it, right? And that's kind of the fun part about all of this stuff. Just like we said back here, where it's like, well, we could think about like an audience that's sort of the unexpected audience, right? And that might inform the way you answer these questions. And then with this one, same deal. It's like, well, are there other ways that we could interpret this? Right off the bat, should we just be outraged? Is that the only way we can see this? Or are there other ways? Or, vice versa, right? Right off the bat, should I find this funny? Is this just like dark humor, or even just like a misstep or something where they didn't even feel like it could be interpreted in a way that people wouldn't find funny? Um, Here's an example of somebody that didn't find it funny. So this is from a graphic designer. This is biting satire, satirical, but without any, not meant to be funny, right? Crafted to fit corners, doorways, and public neglect, stacked cardboard, $0. Affordable but unlivable. And then the bottom copy says at least one of the conditions apply. Victimized by domestic abuse, deprived of social services, denied livable wages, and displaced due to gentrification. Okay. So yeah, I just said this is like an independent graphic designer, but if we were to categorize like a genre of this style of advertisement, it's different from this. This, we have a product, we have a company, we have a brand, they're trying to sell us something. This one, it kind of feels like it fits more into like the public service announcement, the PSA style thing, where yes, we probably still need money. We want donations, but it could be for a cause, or it could be for something like a homeless shelter. It could be for this organization. So certainly different, right? Two different styles of advertisement. Nevertheless, both worth our time. And this person, clearly the IKEA ad didn't sit well with them, and we're parodying, the object with the accompanying price tag, the color coding of the little icon down here matches the color coding of the IKEA logo. But this is very on the nose. There's not really a lot of interpretation here. I wouldn't even need to explain any of this to you to understand, so that like you understand right off the bat that they're not playing around. They're not telling jokes. And that's a convention of the public service announcement, right? Think about like smoking ads, non-smoking ads, right? Think about those brutal ones where you see people and they have had surgery to have parts of their face removed and are speaking through a tube. There's nothing subtle about that. That is in your face, sending a message saying, don't do this because this is what's going to happen to you. So yeah, this is nevertheless interesting response to this. Clearly, they interpreted it in the first way. They thought that they were making fun of domestic abuse victims in order to sell a product. Um, and I think it's interesting to explore, right? Again, because we don't have one definitive answer, we can't say that everyone needs to think this way one way or the other. We can start a debate, right? And we can, voice our opinion and support our argument, but not everyone is going to agree. And that's both the genius and I guess sort of like the manipulative power of the advertisement, right? That when it's done well, you know, unfortunately sometimes there can be, I guess, like hidden messages or different messages. And so, yeah, I don't know. Ultimately, should they have run this? Up to you. Is it writing? Yeah, it is. It's advertising. I love exploring advertisements. We'll probably spend, more time. I know we'll for sure spend more time talking ads throughout the semester. So anticipate that. And then my final example I've got for us, we've got a meme. Me going to play golf today, even though I haven't bought one Christmas present for anyone yet. So it's a meme. It's kind of like a still image meme. These are becoming like less and less popular. And it's interesting to see like the progression of memes, right? Because when that word first started like becoming like a thing, like I think I was like in high school, and you had all the like, I thought it was really stupid because I just thought it was memes were like those characters that, I'm sure a lot of you are just even, you're gonna be too young to even know what I'm talking about, but like the Bad News Brian and like the Shithead Steve. He was kind of funny, Shithead Steve. I kind of liked his memes, but it was just like this character, and he was supposed to represent like an emotion or like an ongoing, sort of saga. And people would write different text on there, and I was like, oh, that's what memes are. Those are kind of stupid. But then it became, obvious not long after that, like, well, actually, memes can be just about anything, right? You could use this, video lecture as a meme if you're funny enough. Find the humor in this video lecture. It's there somewhere. Um, but this style of meme, this specific one, I find interesting because it was, certainly probably from this era where you're just getting like a stock image, specifically like that's the visual that we're getting. And then with the stock image, of course, we need the context, and that's where the text comes to play, the play on the situation, right? And that's what makes it relatable. So the audience for this meme right here, me going to play golf today, even though I haven't bought one Christmas present yet, it's probably for like dads. You know what I mean? It's like not only is it bad dad humor, silly dad joke humor, but it's this kind of dads that like to golf, dads that uh, buying gifts for their kids for their family for the holidays, whatever it is, you know. But if we change the text up and we remove the golf, we remove the Christmas element, we remove the clear dad humor, there are probably still ways that we could find somehow a way to use this stock image and have it relate to a completely different audience, right? That doesn't have to do with golf dads whatsoever, even though we've got a clear picture of a dad golfing over here. But that's kind of the fun part of memes. And so, this particular format, I feel like is becoming less and less popular, and specifically like utilizing the stock images. I still see some use it today, but I'm sure what you've noticed, like on a platform like Instagram, for example, where you know years ago, like that's where all the memes were sent, right? Like Facebook had become for old people. Twitter had its own sort of style of meme that was more like text based, right? Kind of the Twitter comedians and the jokes. You could share something like this on Twitter, no doubt. But like Twitter, for the most part, was like 140 characters, telling your joke, whatever it is, right? It's what lends itself better to that. And so Instagram, yeah, we do that. And now you go on to Instagram, even if you see like a still image, there's like sounds or music behind it, and even that changes the way that you interpret it, right? Like there was a while where I try my best not to get sucked into social media. And so like there was a while where I was just like, I just like deleted the app. But the thing is my buddies, my brother, they love sending me memes on there. So every once in a while I'll go back and like see like the messages that I'd been missing. And I noticed because I didn't want to download the app itself. So I just went in the browser version. And I noticed in the browser version that it doesn't include the music, right? So if this is a still image with music behind it in the app version of it, um, in the browser version, it isn't necessarily going to include that. And so when I eventually caved and went and got the app again, I noticed some of these old messages with still imagery had music behind them. It totally changed, how funny I thought the meme was, right? It totally changed like how you just like the use of music, right? That's now become a convention of Instagram meming and Instagram posts in general. Doesn't just have to be a meme, but just like posting on Instagram. Now it's not like every time I post a video, there I can choose some music. No, it's like now I just instill images. The photos from my vacation, I can put a song behind it. And so I find that very interesting because that really just it has this sort of impact. And yeah, purpose of memes. What's the purpose? Well, the purpose of meme is to make us laugh. But what do we do with the meme when we find it funny? We share it. We share with people who share that sense of humor that share like an appreciation for that topic, and it then builds community, builds friendship, all those things. So memes, are they worth our time for analyzing? Of course they are, yes. Okay, so let's get back to our Blackboard page over here and wrap up the video. So week one content, watch these videos, start there, watch these videos. And then check out this writing guide PDF, right? Writing guide, pages 8 through 22. It's even less than that. It ends up being even fewer um, pages because there's kind of just like sections that are omitted and stuff where just like pictures. And so it ends up being probably like, I don't know, 8 or 9 pages of reading. But read that for this week. When you've read that, respond to these discussion questions. So let me demonstrate real quickly how to access a discussion board. So we have our first discussion board of the semester, writing guide discussion questions. So you'll click this and you won't see the questions yet. I know this is kind of weird. So yeah, maybe a reason to switch to the ultra version of Blackboard if they don't do this. But once you're on this page, you're going to click create thread. Right, so remember that. Click create thread. If you've never used Blackboard before, this is how you do this. Click create thread, and now we see the forum description. Okay. So this is after you've read the writing guide. I want you to respond to these two questions. Where do you get your information? It might be social media platforms like Twitter or TikTok. It could be nightly broadcast TV news programs. It could be print or digital publications like the Chicago Tribune, or even just, word of mouth conversations. Now consider the way you typically interact with these sources. Do you believe you are practicing good critical reading skills while engaging with these sources, or perhaps falling into this idea of passive reading, which is like the equivalent of doom scrolling, right? All of us have been in that situation where you read through something and you don't remember what you read when you get to the bottom of the page. And the same thing happens on social media, right? Where we're seeing so much content, just like one after another. You're seeing a funny meme. Like I think about Twitter specifically, right? Twitter seems to be the most chaotic one. I see a funny joke, and then it moves to like something awful happening, some awful event happening with a video, and then it moves to like some sports info, right? And then it moves to like some conspiracy theory shit. It's like, whew, slow down, right? I'm getting overwhelmed with all of this different stuff, and like I don't know. I think that's it leads to kind of like an interesting conversation. So reflect on that first. And then I'm going to ask you to answer this. So identify a rhetorical situation that you have recently encountered in your life. Okay, so a real situation. And people get like weird about this sometimes. It's like, dude, you don't have to give me anything like personal information that like I'm not asking for anything like super like personal about you, about your life. Um, it could be like an interaction with a stranger. It could be, when you were pissed about somebody on the road who wasn't using their turn signal. I don't care, right? Just give me something. Like we can't just like talk about a rhetorical situation as like a general thing, right? We need it to be specific in order to properly analyze it. Because what I'm going to ask you to do is take that situation and attempt to do what we've done in this video, which is using genre, audience, and purpose. And then your text offers three others: context, culture, and stance. We'll get into those three next week, but I want you to read the PDF. It gives you a definition of these. And so use these 6 criteria to sort of analyze that situation that you've encountered. So specifically something that has happened in your life. You don't have to get too personal with it. Okay, just like whatever. Throw me something that happened at work, something that happened, in class, a boss, a coworker, friend, a family member, whatever it is, stranger, I don't care, but just give me something. All right. And this is going to be due Friday night. So that's going to be pretty standard. Our major projects typically are writing assignments, like a bigger, you know, writing assignment is going to be due Sunday nights. Friday nights are when our discussion boards are going to be. Okay. So that I can read them over the weekend and if need be, use them in the videos for that coming week. So Friday night, this is due, and that's the first discussion board. And as I mentioned, I didn't want to give us too much stuff. I didn't want to give us too much homework for the week, so we can kind of ease into our semester. The other thing I need you to do this writing history reflection. Okay, I mentioned in the first video, we're going to do a few different reflections this semester. This is the first one. So this is going to be a writing assignment, one that you need to write in a Word document, right? This is one of those ones. Every writing assignment, you got to write it in a separate Word document. The discussion boards, you could just write it straight and directly in Blackboard and post it in that space, in that thread, that forum space. Everything else, it needs to be a separate Word document. Don't just write it on Blackboard. So here's what I'm asking for. Reflect on your writing experiences starting with your previous English classes. What did you like or dislike about them? What did the teachers or assignments do well? Or how could the classes have better met your needs? Start with that. So just kind of like a reflection on your previous English classes. Even if you haven't taken, even if, you're a transfer student, you're from elsewhere, you're from outside the country, even don't think about just English, but just writing in general. Okay, that's what I'm more interested in. So even if it's writing that isn't in English, that doesn't matter. That still counts, right? Talk about that's what I'm more concerned with. So it doesn't have to be a college level class. It doesn't have to be just English, but talk about writing in an academic context. Um, Next, describe other kinds of writing you've interacted with. Okay, so this is like could be things like creative writing, could be things like social media posts, could be, if your job requires you to do some sort of technical writing, journalism, lab reports, screenplays, Yelp reviews, emails, whatever it is, right? Tell me why these appeal to you, okay? And how do you use them in your everyday life? And then finally, conclude with your general feelings about the writing process. Why or why don't you consider yourself a writer? Why do you like or dislike writing? What are your strongest skills as a writer, and where do you struggle? What can this class do to help you with your writing process? So tell me some stories if that helps. Give me some details for a nice, thorough reflection. Submit this as a Word document. We're shooting for about 300 words. This is going to be due Sunday night. Okay. And that's our week. Okay. So I'm going to sign off, right? Email me, hit me up if you have questions. A lot of you, I'm going to see you. What is going to be tomorrow? By the time I post this, Monday, my ALP students, I'll see you tomorrow. The rest of you guys, if you need anything from me, let me know. Have a good week.